We have our session for the March CDEG PD for Getting Ahead, Bridging the Gap Between Academic Integrity and Curriculum to Support Assessment Design. We have with us Holly Scurr from Conestoga College as a curriculum consultant, and Cory Scurr, Associate Director of the Academic Integrity, also Conestoga College. Thank you both for volunteering your time and expertise today. And I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Same college and same household. We are married, not siblings, just to clarify, the same last name. Yeah, and welcome to this PD session for CDEG. So Cory and I started developing this a little while ago.
I do have a
Oh,
Keep going, Holly. All good.
keep going. Okay, just checking my screens. Yeah, we started developing this a little while ago for our college-wide E3 presentation, and we thought, this might be relevant to the CDEG group, and just interested in any feedback that might be going on at your colleges to see how, these silos are being broken down in between departments. So, Cory, do you have any comments on to start with?
Yeah. Let me also clarify that we have cherry picked. I have cherry picked some of previous sessions that I've delivered at conferences or talks that I've given. So this is not all original content. However, everything here has been created in conjunction or in collaboration with Holly, thought partner, whatever we want to call that. So this is our content, but it has been given or presented in other areas. And so we're always looking for feedback, on this. We're also going to try to keep the comments and questions to the end if possible. We're going to keep this very conversational, very, very relaxed. However, it might be most advantageous if we open up the conversation at the end. Sounds good? Okay, here we go. Here's our agenda. Holly, let us know.
So we'll start with the paradigm shift, our two hats, silos and knots, a foundation with 3 key concepts to just get the conversation rolling, and then filters, to consider. And then last of all, we'll get into some questions and hopefully a conversation. So we'll try to move through these. Hopefully these agenda items are catching your attention and interest.
All very cryptic, right? Okay, so let's start the conversation with the paradigm shift. This is something that has sort of taken higher education kind of by storm, I'd say in the last minimum decade, maybe close to 20 years. And particularly in the academic integrity world, like we're seeing this big paradigm shift. And in fact, there's a scholar, his name is Jason Openow. He summarizes really nicely this paradigm shift. And he suggests that it's a shift that has taken us away from a policy-driven policing perspective to more a perspective that assigns a lot more responsibility to the conditions of teaching and learning. This paradigm shift really stresses that academic integrity must not be dominated by rule compliance, nor can it place the onus squarely on students, right? But rather, we need to be pushing the agenda and trying to frame this within a teaching and learning perspective, one that considers instructional design of courses, faculty teaching practices, curriculum design, and quality assurances processes. So with the shift, academic integrity began weaving itself, right, and other areas like teaching and learning, assessment design, and curriculum.
And I think as a curriculum consultant, this has really perpetrated our world recently in the form of the tools and technologies that students have access to. So this is impacting the achievement of learning outcomes. Are students just leapfrogging right over a learning outcome because they're using a particular tool and they're not actually driving right through the learning? So some assessments are no longer an accurate measure of the learning outcomes as they've been written. And as a result, we have to have this foundational knowledge of, what cheating or academic offenses, you know, look like and how they're undermining the measurement of these outcomes. So you're probably all thinking like, okay, we sleep and breathe this stuff every day, like we know all of this. But not all of our faculty and instructors know a lot about this, and there's a lot of conversations and questions coming in. I see it with discussing outlines, with course reviews, and even course development. A lot of our faculty aren't aware of some of these, shifts that are happening.
And this is all really, really important because of this is in our agenda because of the various hats that we wear. Um, so we both, Holly and I reflect on this a lot. We both wear, you know, two hats. One, of course, is the policy and procedure hat. In my world, it's Sarah has a problem in her course. She's teaching, and now she has, 17 students have run, leveraged generative artificial intelligence, all on assignments, which have completely undermined the assessment outcomes, right? So Sarah comes to me and says, we have a problem. How can you help me navigate this misconduct? Of course, we're going to put on, the procedure hat. Here's our policy. Here's what we do. Here are the questions that we ask. We guide her through that, right? But then often we'll take that hat off and I'll put the other hat on, which is the education hat. Um, we leverage a lot of the pain points that we see happening in the class, and those pain points are the types of cheating, how students are cheating, why students are cheating, and of course we can gather our data for that as well. But then our faculty want to know, how can we move past this? How can we move away from just the policy and procedure, the compliance, the monitoring, and move on to something a little bit different. And here's then where, or a little bit more robust so that we're actually going to be able to change the student behavior. But then that enters a conversation that's much bigger than academic integrity, right? Enter teaching and learning and enter curriculum.
Yeah, and similarly in curriculum, we have processes and procedures for things like developing course outlines that ensure this, strong alignment between program learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, and assessment design. So
Yeah,
that's
but
kind of
then but
like,
then Holly, a faculty will say, well, what about all the cheating that happens in my course?
and this is where we need to take off the procedural hat and put on the education hat and see how these other departments play a big role and how we are really overlapped. So understanding that kind of foundational knowledge that runs across, okay, what's some data around the misconduct that's going on in this particular course, in this particular type of course? Can we give this faculty some feedback? Let's tap into the academic integrity office. Now let's direct you to teaching and learning for some really creative ways of maybe coming up with some new assessment designs once you've solidified what those learning outcomes are and that they are in fact still true and good measures, good goals for the program overall in this particular course.
So the point is, we both wear different hats. Both are governed by, policy and procedure, but we also wear those education hats. And when we put those education hats on, the overlap is quite a bit. Now, interestingly enough, many of our campuses are, they're siloed. Some of them, like they're siloed, some of them for very, very good reasons. Others not the greatest reasons. We're not here to judge, right? But some institutions have, like us, we have a teaching and learning area, we have a curriculum area, we have an academic integrity area, online learning area, we have an open education area, accessibility, on and on and on and on, right? And a lot of the separation makes sense. However, sometimes we get questions like, who can help me with this? We get that, I get that particularly from faculty who've just run into misconduct. We've solved that problem, but they know that the problem is, is bigger than just that isolated case, right? So they want to know who can guide faculty. Faculty want to know who can guide them and who can guide the program teams in areas of conceptualizing or reconceptualizing courses and assessments, particularly in the face of, threatening tools and technologies. And who can do this? Who can provide the support, especially when our campuses are siloed?
I think it's been a traditional way for dealing with this siloing has been to have almost like a conveyor belt or um, that kind of assembly line approach where you meet with curriculum first to do some development, then you might go to teaching and learning to build out those activities and, build out the course activities and details. And then once you've run the course once or twice, you're in touch with academic integrity because you've had some misconduct and now you've got some data around that. And then maybe you're cycling back after a program review or something. And the truth is that this approach is not really the best to serve such a nuanced and organic reality of the program development and review. I think there needs to be some more collaboration between departments. So we're catching and we're kind of each department is aware of the others so that we can effectively guide faculty if they're asking a consultant some details about academic integrity, then we've got some foundational knowledge, and we can also say, head over to Cory Scurr. He knows some details of some ways of tracking your pain points for this course. So it's having a foundational knowledge in all of the departments so we can help guide our faculty more seamlessly.
Yeah, so the point is, remember, is not to suggest that we need to break down silos and make it all into one. It's rather recognizing that all of us collectively, all of our areas, need to be laying those breadcrumbs for everyone else and then passing the baton. So in other words, who's facilitating this paradigm shift? It's all of us. It's the corniest thing we're going to say to you. It's a little bit patronizing, but it's true. And also pay attention to the screen right now. We did this in Copilot, and you notice that the silos say library, teaching and learning. I even told Copilot how to spell it, and they got so close, but they spelled curriculum wrong. So close. I was impressed. Okay, moving on.
So, yeah, some of the big questions we get, from faculty are where do we go from here? So, maybe we're talking about a course review. How do I fix this? Where do I go from here? How do we get in front of this? And, who can help? Like, I don't have all the knowledge as an instructor. Who can I go to for some help with this? So the key here is getting the conversation going. We've got to, first of all, detangle some assumptions. So tools and technology, they may pose a threat to assessment security and, accurate measuring of learning outcomes. But in the right context, can the same tools and technology be the right tool for the job and actually be very relevant for the vocational skills that those students are going to get when they're going into industry? They might be actually appropriate for the learning outcome.
And I'm wondering here if anyone has ever, or your institution, maybe you do have a policy on Gen AI, but I know a lot of people were asking, what's our policy? And for some reason, they were often coming to the academic integrity office because we just presumed that Gen AI was going to, facilitate cheating or cause cheating. What's the policy? What's the policy? And I often said, I'm not sure we're going to have a policy. Of course, I couldn't speak entirely authoritatively on it. But I said, I think we won't have a policy, just like we don't have a policy on calculators and other tools and technologies. We might have some guiding principles and some best practices, but I'm not sure we're going to have a policy because like these two bullet points suggest, it takes finesse. In one context, a calculator is cheating. In another context, it's the right tool for the job.
I think the second piece, how do we help guide faculty? We need to provide a foundation. And this can be done with, some clear concepts, helping them kind of look through certain lenses for viewing what they've already got going on in their course. So this next one, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are 3 helpful concepts to help kind of view what's the objective from these learning outcomes and how do the assessments play into that. So the first one here is automaticity. So, what needs to be recalled very quickly. Cognitive offloading is another one. and evaluative judgment. So let me go into each of these. And, in collaboration with other departments, such as, again, teaching and learning and academic integrity, this is where we get the conversation to build the foundation of some key concepts that are going to help faculty conceptualize if they're developing or reconceptualize their assessment design as it aligns to their course learning outcomes and their program learning outcomes. Okay, so first one, automaticity. So this is similar to riding a bike, using a pipette in a lab, or landing a plane. The ability to perform a behavior or mental process quickly and effortlessly without requiring conscious attention or explicit intention. So this is sometimes very necessary. If you've gone in for a doctor's checkup and he's looking at your foot and he starts singing the leg bones connected to and you're trying to recall the parts of your body with a little jingle he learned in kindergarten, your confidence in that doctor might be a little low, right? So some skills, it's necessary to have automaticity and these are important measures in the learning outcomes. So in this case, we want to, this might be something where we're actually watching a performance, watching a skill test of a student using a pipette, and they're demonstrating their use of that pipette and their skill in that way. And that's how we measure competence. So again, aligning our outcomes so that our verbiage, clear performance verbs, are well aligned to the objective of those vocational skills. So automaticity is one. Cognitive offloading is another. Maybe you jot things down so you don't have to memorize them in your head. Maybe you're using a calculator to crunch some numbers. And the latest is Gen AI, maybe for spurring some ideas. So the use of physical action to alter information processing requirements of a task so as to reduce cognitive demand. This can be really useful. Again, if you're in the lab, a very good lab technologist does not need to know every single element on the periodic table and its position. Being able to use a resource like the periodic table is, a good skill for them to be a very good lab technician. They don't need to necessarily have that memorized and have it automatically recalled. Another example, maybe to go, using the calculator example, there was a year when our youngest son, Rowan, was homeschooled for grade 4. And, we did a lot of thinking about, we were thrust into figuring out, how to meet his learning requirements for that grade 4 year. Math was one of them. And, we didn't say, okay, you're going to learn the concept of multiplication and division. Here's the calculator. Plug in the 3, then the X, then the 2, then those 2 lines, and that's there. You've got the concept. So some tools actually leapfrog or detour around the objected learning, and that's what we want to avoid. So we want to say, are these cognitive offloading tools actually enhancing students' ability or even allowing them to save the bandwidth on certain tasks to really emphasize their skill in another task? And in that case, maybe it's very beneficial that these tools are used. In other cases, not so much. They're actually skipping, by allowing them to use this tool, they're bypassing the learning that we want them to do. And it's not an accurate measure. And the last one here is evaluative judgment. So evaluative judgment is the capability to make decisions about the quality of work of oneself, others, and now it's also of robots. So, there's so much out there now. We have so much access to information. We've never been more connected and you don't no longer even have to walk down to the library to get information. You just open your laptop and it's all there. It's deciding what information is relevant and good and necessary for the particular problem that you're working on. So, this is an important skill, and we've got to guide our students with how to use these tools. So as an instructor, there's been times where I've asked my students, if your calculator popped out an answer, think about whether that makes sense for the question that you're trying to calculate. So if I asked you to determine the birth rate in Canada in 2024 and you got a negative exponent, like you probably did something wrong in your processing of that calculation. So it's having that evaluative judgment, whether it's for a simple task like that or something more complex where we're actually using generative AI to, spur some ideas, but then how do students assess the output of that information to decide if it's relevant?
Okay, over to me. So, as I said at the beginning, we've taken components, pieces of this from other talks, and we've kind of meshed them together, given what Hala and I have chatted about over, the course of a few months. And we often look at tools and technology, particularly that of Gen AI, as a threat, right? A threat to our assessments. So some of the talks we've given are, neutralizing this threat. How do we neutralize the threat, particularly of tools and technologies, but it can be anything, even the threat of cheating generally. How do we neutralize the threat to our learning outcomes? And then we have to consider then, where do tools and technologies like Gen AI fit into the classroom? So Holly's provided this foundation. Like we said, we have questions from faculty all the time, like, thanks for solving my problem on how to create an outline or how to navigate this misconduct. But where do we go from here? And we can say, well, consider those three chunky concepts: automaticity, evaluative judgment, cognitive offloading. Have those in your brain, right? Nice, juicy concepts. And let's get then a little bit more granular. And here's where we get more granular. Come up with a few filters, three filters. They're still, I don't want to say they're embryonic phases anymore. They're not in the embryonic phase. They're slowly growing. We're nurturing them. But here are the filters that I'm starting to, and hopefully we'll be able to um, make this a little bit more robust moving forward. But here are the filters that we ask faculty to consider when they have an existing assignment that might be under that threat. So the first filter that we want faculty to consider, or if you want to consider, or you want to use this, guiding faculty, are these. First one is this: abandon to neutralize. So should I abandon or stop using the assessment that is under threat? Second one is monitor to neutralize. Should I monitor, maybe it's just more closely, the assessment taking place? Third is enhance to neutralize. Should I enhance or improve in various ways the assessment? And there's also sort of a sub filter to this. That's part of the enhancement is adopt. Can you enhance it by actually adopting to neutralize the technology? But of course, we always want to be considering things like automaticity, cognitive offloading, and evaluative judgment. So let's dive into these filters a little bit more. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're laughing. Okay, abandon to neutralize. Should I abandon or stop using this assessment? Here are some guiding questions. Now, here are some of the questions that I would ask faculty if I'm trying to, precipitate one of those, I'm laying some breadcrumbs, right? And then after we go through this and I say, hey, over to teaching and learning kind of thing. So here's some of the guiding questions that I ask. When was this assessment created? Sounds a little bit silly, but how many of us have had or have heard someone say, well, I inherited this assignment. I opened up my course shell because it was pre-populated and there was my assessment. Or, we've always done it this way. Or back in my day in uni, I used to do this. So therefore we should probably do it. Interestingly enough, there's a chapter from I'm going to nerd out here, from Philip Shaw. He discusses plagiarism. And he wrote an article called "Are We Making Our Students Plagiarize?" And he talks about the history of plagiarism. And I won't go into the history of plagiarism, even though I desperately want to. But essentially, What he says is that academia has evolved over the course of almost 200 years. And essentially, what we've had our students do is mimic that of the academic. But what do academics do? They typically research and they publish. So they research and they write. They research and they write. So what do? Let's just get our students to do the same thing. That's a little bit outdated, particularly in a lot of our vocational education. So when was this assessment created? And why was this assessment created? Was it to mimic academics? Hopefully not, because most of our students, most of us, are not academics. What level of thinking are we striving for? Can the assessment be easily offloaded to a tool? And if so, we have to ask, is this okay? Here's where that cognitive offloading, big chunky concept comes into place. If it's like, yeah, we used to have to memorize all of these equations, or we used to have to memorize the periodic table of elements, building on Holly's example. Do we really need that? No, we have this tool. Let's go ahead and bring that in. So can an assessment be easily offloaded? And if so, is that okay? Oops, I went a little bit too quick. So determining whether or not an assignment is still useful, is still valid, is a good, sorry, this filter is a good way of assessing at a very, very, very high level some of those really easy questions to discern, right? Can this
And
be easily cheated on? Yeah, go ahead,
just
go
to
ahead.
jump in, Cory, to make sure that it's still fulfilling the objectives of the learning outcomes. So, is this still relevant to those program learning outcomes? Has anything changed along the way? Are those program learning outcomes still relevant to what's happening vocationally in that field and all the way down?
Yeah, which is a great, that's a testament to how, the academic integrity area is often just like thrust into the curriculum area. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not suggesting I have to have all the answers. I just have to know what's happening over there so I can lay the breadcrumbs and then pass on the baton. Okay, abandon to neutralize. Next one, monitor to neutralize. So remember that concept of automaticity? Sometimes we have to really watch someone. This is particularly important in the trades, in a lot of our health and life sciences. Obviously, there's a lot more, but we need to watch and we need to make sure our students know what they're doing. It sounds a little bit Orwellian, right, at first, but we know that there's actually a shift going back to the classroom because our students can and do, says the data, easily cheat on some of our assignments. So if it's something that automaticity is crucial for, is crucial, we may want to monitor. So some guiding questions. I should have hit that first. Is automaticity required? How might a student cheat? Interestingly enough, it sounds like a little bit defeatist. But I often go into a program meeting or a workshop and say, well, how are your students cheating? Like, oh, Cory, that's defeatist. No, no, no. Let's figure out how they're cheating and then try to discover why they're cheating, and then try to react to it. Try to be more proactive, not put up all these barriers, right? Not let's say not try to monitor them more closely or let's try to set them up for failure. Let's figure out how we can readjust our assessments. If we can't readjust our assessments, if we have a really solid assessment, I need to make sure that this person knows how to use a pipette so that when they go into the lab, they can rock it out. We just have to monitor them. We have to know what we're seeing. If cheating occurs, is this just an invalid assessment? So there's a brilliant scholar. He's in Australia. His name is Philip Dawson. He wrote an article 2024 called "Validity Matters More Than Cheating." And he actually argues that we should reframe cheating as a problem of assessment validity. So their view addresses cheating without moralizing it, right? Because every time you say, Holly, you cheated, it's entering that moral and ethical realm. But they're suggesting that, well, if you cheat, or especially if we use a tool, well, you're just undermining the assessment, the validity of the assessment. Therefore, you get a 0. You don't also get then a label of cheater. So it's somewhat contentious if we apply a broad stroke to that validity perspective. So there's certain things like contract cheating and others that, that doesn't apply here. It's just not only is it invalid, but it is also unethical. But but we can be reconceptualizing how we're going to be leveraging things like our rubrics um, more broadly to decide if monitoring is a good way. So do you use tools and technology to monitor is the next one. So of course, we always say beware of the arms race. There will always be an arms race relative to tools and technology and how we're trying to stop them. A great example is Turnitin or other plagiarism detection software, or Respond as Monitor. Sometimes we do have to monitor our students, but we have to be cautious not to rely solely on those monitoring tools and technologies. Um, do you find yourself monitoring for monitoring's sake? I'm actually developing a workshop right now for a group of faculty who find themselves monitoring for monitoring's sake, and now they're shifting to a BYOD classroom, and they're thinking, "Ooh, now what do we do? Now how do we monitor?" And what the chair has asked is, how do we reframe that thinking to, rather than how do we change how we monitor these students, to how do we reconceptualize our assessments? So that was our second filter. We're calling them filters, right? Abandon to neutralize, monitor to neutralize. And last but not least, the other filter that we can deploy is enhance to neutralize. So should I enhance or should I improve in various ways the assessment? So some guiding questions, there's the basics, right? Do you have things like question pools? Do you have multiple test versions, question randomization, etc.? If you don't, and we're very good at spending faculty's time, and I admit it, maybe we want to consider doing some things like this, right? But this may be the bridge, this is, while it's easier to do, it might be the bridge that some faculty need before they get into things like reconceptualizing their assessments. Maybe you have to play the long game, right? If a faculty's set on their current sort of layout, but they're running into a lot of misconduct areas or issues, we say, well, let's play the long game here. Let's reconsider how we are doing our current tests with all of these steps. And then once they see that working, then maybe we can move on to some bigger items like complete redesign. Of course, my favorite, have you considered, universal designs of learning principles? One of the really interesting article, Want Your Students to Write Better, Assigned Video Essays, came out recently, leverages universal designs of learning principles. I'm lucky enough to teach a micro-credential. And of course, faculty have to submit, or participants have to submit an assignment. So what do? I always make sure that they have a choice with how they want to present their ideas, right? Leveraging UDL principles. And they're incredible. Some of the submissions that I get from faculty are absolutely amazing because they just don't want to do that classic, essay writing thing. So undergraduates, we know that this
Cory,
article says, oh,
sorry, just
please.
to cut you off, and one
Yeah.
thing that a lot of faculty might come back with there is, if you're giving so many options, how are you marking all of these different assessments that are coming in? Is there any comeback
They
for them?
might, though there will be. So again, my suggestion to that is start with two, either a classic essay or a video essay, and then develop your rubrics. Then next semester or the year after, you go, when you're doing, your APR, maybe you're going to have those two, and then you add a third one, or maybe a third and a fourth one, like an infographic or an H5P presentation or something like that, or a PowerPoint presentation along with the notes, right? So we can still do this incrementally. We always want to be playing the long game, but yeah, 100%. There will always be the question of time, resources, and money, frankly. But we do know, this article suggests that we do know that undergraduates can very effectively develop writing and research skills by experimenting with things like the video essay genre. Of course, choice. This is the best. This aligns directly with what Holly was saying. With too much choice might be a little bit too hard to engender right now or create right now. However, choice is so important, particularly from an academic integrity perspective. Self-determination theory is something that I teach in one of my courses, and it says that having autonomy as well as control over our choice makes us a lot more motivated. It makes us more committed to what we're doing. And when we're more motivated and when we're more committed, we're less likely to commit academic misconduct, even in the face of things like Gen AI. So these are some of the guiding questions that we can ask when we're enhancing to neutralize our assignment. But we can also look at enhancing it from this perspective. Should I just enhance or improve my evaluation criteria? Now, full disclaimer, didn't come up with this one at all on my own. Full kudos to our teaching and learning department. But they ask questions like, what does your rubric currently measure? And if we're considering certain tools that may undermine our assignments, are there ways of just adjusting our rubric? Does your rubric discourage AI use? If we
Kate's
get
comment, sorry, Cord, Kate's comment in the chat, when building your rubric, it should work for all formats, kind of speaks to that as well.
Perfect. Okay, so in other words, that we don't have to come up with multiple rubric formats. If we have a really good rubric, we can still offer choice, but the effort should be going into building a savvy rubric. And if you get a chance to check this out, it's on our Teaching and Learning Hub. It's called AI Savvy Rubrics for Writing Assignments. Our teaching and learning consultants, Ellen Paulson and Ada Sharp, came up with this, and they talked about things like rather than trying to prevent it or let's just call a spade, dealing with cheating using AI. If we craft our rubrics in a way, we can ask things like, well, what about information accuracy? If we have something like information accuracy rolled into our rubric, then we can grade it low if Gen AI is used. So inaccurate content will not meet a minimum standard. Things like verifiable references. Do you have verifiable references within your assignment? Because hallucinated references will not meet the minimum standard. Things like language, voice, and style. So things like embellished, flowery, exaggerated language, they will not meet the minimum standard. Or emphasis on nuance or complexity. So lack of addressing nuance or complexity will not meet the minimum standard. So by adjusting our rubrics, we can actually then spend less time overly worrying about whether or not students are using Gen AI, because if they do, they simply just won't meet the learning outcomes. I already talked about this, so I'm not going to get into it too much more. But this builds on the validity of the assignment. We can always shift the conversation as much as we can away from that moral and ethical realm and into more a conversation about validity. Rather than, did our students cheat? Are they a cheater? Which often our faculty, they don't, it's so time consuming. It's so emotionally draining, but they can say, look, they didn't meet the assignment outcomes. Good. Not good, but they're failing. And now I don't have to go and, go through that whole academic integrity process. And last question to consider is, does or can your rubric focus on course specific content? And do you incorporate evidence of progression? This is a really important factor to consider. So things like connections to course material. So if you have vague or inaccurate or general attempts to connect to specific course content, you're not meeting the minimum standard and you might be getting your 0 or your 1. What about connection to hyperlocal issues or organizations? If you're not able to connect to these items, then you're not meeting the minimum effort, the minimum standard. Evidence of progression, things like that. So limited or incomplete evidence of drafts, notes, or outlines. If you don't have those, you're not meeting the minimum standard. And of course, that's when they can say, well, go check out the academic integrity website, who gives you explanation on how to keep your drafts. So there's evidence and there are resources out there for our students. Another one is application of human feedback. So minimal application of specific peer or faculty feedback, so getting into that evaluative judgment, will not meet the minimum standards. So simply by enhancing our evaluation criteria is one of those ways that we might be able to neutralize the threat of tools and technology. But of course, we can also maybe adopt this tool and technology. So we have to ask ourselves, so if we know our students are leveraging a calculator, or if we know that they're leveraging generative artificial intelligence, should they actually be able to leverage this and use this? Big questions. Do you see an option for students to use the tool and technology? Can I think objectively, would this be advantageous for them? A big one is industry using the tool? And do you feel obliged to teach the students how to properly and ethically use the tool? And then, of course, how will you measure learning? And this is where that big chunky concept of evaluative judgment really comes in. Because of course, if people are able to, or students are using these tools, we have to know that they are able to judge the effectiveness of those tools, right? The humans have to be the final voice. So how are we going to be measuring that? Evaluative judgment, of course, like I just said, and then the idea of reverse scaffolding. Usually I have a slide on reverse scaffolding, but you kind of consider this. Consider having a student, you provide your student with 3 prompts, or you provide them with 2 prompts, and then they have to come up with one. They have to explain why they've come up with that prompt, and then it gives them that output, right? It might be, oh gosh, I don't know, you're so good at coming up with examples on the fly. A prompt on, why did the Russian Revolution happen? That's not a very good one. Some prompt, and then the prompt gives them 3 answers, or the prompt gives them 1 answer, and then they do another prompt. It gives them another answer, and then their prompt gives them another answer. You then have them critique each answer, and then you reduce, and then you have them engage with some prompt engineering, which is teaching them how to use the tool, and then they deploy evaluative judgment. And they start sort of getting into the nitty gritty of how effective or ineffective some of these tools can be. So reverse scaffolding, that was a very, very high level view of it, is one way of having our students engage with those tools.
Sorry, just to add to that, Cory, I think another thing that really touches on that reverse scaffolding piece is, this division between assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning. So many of our assessments are to measure competence, but some of these assessments, this is where the educational hat goes on again, because how can we incorporate various aspects into these assessments where the assessment itself is also a learning tool?
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree. That's good nuance. And I suppose lastly, not related to that at all, Holly, but McMaster University has a good sample assessment library that I try to point our faculty to all the time. So it's essentially just this working library, this ongoing library of assignments that faculty are using, or faculty have used that incorporate Gen AI. So finding things like this to pass on to our faculty is always good, because maybe they do actually want to adopt to neutralize the threat. And finally, I think we're okay for time halls. We have 15 minutes, so if you want to do closing thoughts.
I think closing thoughts, this breaking down the silos of departments. It's not saying that we're collapsing in on one, but it's having a foundational knowledge to know to work as a very collaborative team to help direct and support faculty and program teams. So, understanding what the other department's expertise are and having this underlying, understanding of how it all bleeds into one so we can help guide faculty. That's one key takeaway from this. Knowing that we've got 2 hats that we're wearing. So the procedural hat, which is very important, but also, and I think this dives into the assessment for learning versus assessment of learning as well, where we're taking off, we oftentimes, when you're developing a course or a program, you're thinking about those assessments of learning initially. So where are they going to be placed, and are they accurate measures of the learning outcomes? This is where we're developing our outlines at the beginning. But, what type of activities could also be included? What type of assessments could be included for learning as well? And thinking about that educational hat, and that dives into a lot of creative ideas coming out of teaching and learning, as well as all of the data and the experience that's coming out of academic integrity and other offices. These are just three that we're highlighting today, but there's, the registrar's office and things. There's many other departments that come into this. Any other points, Cory, that you want to
No,
bring up?
nailed it. That's fine. I think we should, yeah, well, here's our bibliography. Nice and robust for you. Um, Time for questions and conversation. If we have any questions or conversation, please go ahead, Joyce.
Hi, I'm just trying to turn on my video. Hello, thank you so much for that presentation. I found it really helpful because it validated some of the things that I've been exploring with our faculty teams. I was really interested in the rubric piece. I really loved the idea of building into the rubric, the information accuracy piece, and also, what is it that you require for the minimum standard? Like, for example, if they're in, I've made the suggestion for writing assignments that they submit two versions of the assignment, one which shows the original thought, and then another version that shows the AI enhanced version. So that would be an example of a minimum requirement, like you need two versions. If you don't have the two versions, so if you don't meet that minimum requirement, I'm curious to know what people are doing. Like, are they giving the students a zero, or are they just warning the students saying, "Hey, I noticed you didn't meet the requirement. Can you just resubmit?" I'm just wondering how people are
Yeah,
dealing with that.
that's a really good question. So this is pretty new. It was rolled out this semester, so it's pretty new. So our teaching and learning consultants, Ada and Alan, who developed this, we're still gathering our evidence. Here's where the tricky thing comes in, I think, when we're considering rubrics and academic integrity. Some of our faculty will say, we're just going to give you a really low mark. You might get a 40 on this, or you might get a 25%. And you just didn't meet the minimum standards, therefore you're failing. Others are going to say, well, not only did you not meet the minimum standard, I also know you use AI, therefore I'm also going to file an academic offense. And that's where we have some contentious conversations. That's when it comes to my office. And they say, well, we use this rubric and I want to also file an incident. It's like they're kind of getting double punished here. And that's where we have the conversation about validity. What are we trying to measure here? And here's where we talked about at the very beginning, that paradigm shift. We can say our students, they might know that this is cheeky, but they're choosing to use it otherwise. But we don't know. How can we really determine intentionality here? As a result, let's skip the academic offense because it's really difficult to determine intentionality and just fail them. I know that sounds kind of sounds bad, but they're not meeting the minimum requirements. So faculty are still acclimatizing themselves to this rubric. But that's where, again, the message can't just come from teaching and learning. It has to come from my area as well, in our area, and then curriculum's area. Because if it's only coming from teaching and learning, you're only getting a fraction of the people who are hearing you. And that's, again, that's the importance of bridge building. So that's my roundabout way, Joyce, of saying that we don't really have any conclusive data on how faculty are using this yet, but we have seen that potential contentious issue where they're doing both, filing an offense and giving him a zero on the rubric.
What department are you in, Corey?
The academic integrity office.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns, critiques? Do you want to add something to it? Did we miss something?
I have one. Um, I love some of those some of the guiding principles you had, and I keep wondering. I think we all know, well, maybe not all, but a lot of our concerns tend to be around courses that are prevalently writing courses, like communications courses, that also meet the needs of a variety of industries. And I know I'm supporting a few of their development and redevelopment right now. So how might you suggest approaching that where like, is the tool going to be appropriate for your industry? We kind of don't know for that, especially like level 1 or 2, where you're getting a catchment of so many different programs in communications courses.
That one's really tough, Sarah. I was hoping that you would never ask a question like that. Um, no, we have, luckily, we have a really good rapport and relationships with our comms area, right? Where we have like however many hundreds of sections. So it's touching on everyone. Um, I think I've been here for almost 7 years and they've revamped their curriculum at least 3 times since I've been here. So I'm stalling while someone else can actually come and give you a good answer, Sarah. But no, I've asked really dicey questions like do our students really need to be able to write independently? Or should we just teach them how to write with the tool?
Mhm.
And that, of course, that ruffles a lot of feathers. And I love writing, and I grew up learning how to write, so I'm even in this ethical conundrum of whether or not I want to even ask that question. But I think it's important. But I am sorry. I'm very sorry. I don't have a good answer for that one.
No,
Um,
it's also, there's some comfort and commiseration sometimes because we're dealing with very similar things, and some of our faculty members, being like, well, I'm gonna have to start doing everything in face to face and with pen and paper so I can ensure that they don't cheat. You're like, well, that's not the accessible or ethical answer either. So it's good
right.
to hear what other institutions might have as well.
I think the other thing there is really also more conversations with industry because these are dipping into essential employability skills, right? Like that's where we're talking about basic communication, and is this going to be you know a basic skill very soon? And I think that's having the conversation and the clear communication with multiple industries and all of those communities is essential for how quickly that transfers into the education system. And then I think to Cory's point earlier, the more people, it's not enough for one department to just push these ideas. It's got to be a united front. This is what we talk about with our parenting. If mom says no and dad says yes, it's not a united front. So you've got to have this full force kind of line at the front to really disseminate that information. And I think that's got to come, it comes quickly with a lot of collaboration and a lot of conversations and a lot of hard conversations that, and also knowing that our role is not to tell faculty what to do. Like we don't have the authority to tell faculty what to do. We can guide and we can put evidence out there for guiding principles, but it's really just how do we have these conversations more often and deeply?
Yeah, I think that's important, Ollie, that we don't have the authority to tell faculty what to do, but just ask those questions. Like, well, do you think your students really need to know how to write? And of course, they're going to say, yes, of course. Okay, how do they need to know how to write? I think that's the first part. That's foundation. That's ground zero. Um, get us really thinking about the value of our current assignments.
Mm.
Jenny, we have one. Charlene says, in one of my courses, I encourage them to use Gen AI. Use Gen AI for project ideas and outline, but they write the assessment. Yeah, that's awesome. And then I suppose it's just the follow-up question then is how do you ensure that your students are in fact um, writing authentically and not then leveraging Gen AI? Because I think it's really important for our students to know how to use the tools, but also they need to know how unreliable they are sometimes. I use it all the time. I use this all the time. And I think when it first came out, we thought, ooh, I'm going to take this 2 hour project and crunch it into an hour or 20 minutes. That's not really the truth, is it? It's like I'm going to take this 2 hours and maybe shave it down to like an hour 40, hour 30, maybe if I'm getting really good at it. But then also highlighting all the flaws in it, right? There's a they don't we're questioning whether or not we should be calling it hallucinations, but inventing facts, inventing citations and references, it will make things up. And so I think our students have to learn that this is not the be all and end all tool. And I think we as higher education, have an obligation to show them that. And if we can incorporate that into our assessment design or have that in the back of our minds, I think that could be useful. And maybe Sarah, that's kind of something that we consider in those writing courses. You have Gen AI write something, and then maybe if we do some homework on some prompts that we know that will elicit some pretty bad outputs, we can have them critique it. And then students are like, oh my gosh, this isn't as good as I thought. I do need to put my touch on this. And also almost empowering them over the tool. That might take some pretty interesting design ideas, but that might be interesting to consider.
I have seen some of them move towards that kind of like conversational use of it, and then trying to engage the Gen AI in a like a debate and prove it wrong or agree with it with more information. Yeah.
Right, right. And then you're deploying that evaluative judgment skill, right? You're deciding whether or not this tool is good or bad and why. We have Pamela saying related. Of course, we're about to go with her independent. We need to be able to write independently. Do we no longer think independent brainstorming or active thinking is an important skill to foster? I feel like this is one of the first skills to go when we start incorporating Gen AI. Can of worms. No need to address. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize your last parentheses. I think that's important, though. I think that's something that we can maybe consider when we're deciding, what we're measuring. Are we measuring those brainstorming aspects? Is that key? Is that foundational? I think that is a can of worms that we should open, definitely. I'm happy to share, Joyce, no problem.
Well, just as I don't know if you're going to share via chat or would you like it to be sent out, say, through CDIG newsletter or something?
Whatever's
Whatever.
easiest, Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you
With
want
the
to.
recording, yeah.
Yep, we can do that. I will stop this recording.